Sometimes the worst moments of our lives are just the universe preparing us for who we're meant to become. In the unforgiving heartland, where fortunes are built on grit and destroyed by greed, a legend forged in the fire of humiliation was about to unfold, its silent storm gathering force. The harsh fluorescent lights of the Reed Agri-Corp processing plant hummed, indifferent to the weight of the words that had just been flung across the concrete floor. "You don't belong here. People like you should stay outside." The voice, sharp as a new plow blade, belonged to Megan Holt, operations director, and it sliced through the industrial din, drawing every eye. Lucas Reed stood frozen, a hand truck half-loaded with sacks of feed, his worn work boots planted firmly on the stained floor. His face, smeared with a smudge of grease and dust, betrayed nothing. His gaze was calm, almost unnervingly so, even as the insult echoed, resonating with a bitter truth about the perceived gap between his appearance and his surroundings. He looked poor, insignificant, a ghost haunting the edges of a world that refused to acknowledge him. The air seemed to thicken, charged with the unspoken agreement of the onlookers, their pity and contempt a palpable pressure that threatened to crush the very breath from his lungs. This was Lucas's moment, a crucible forged not just in the fire of public scorn, but in the deeper, colder flame of his family's imperiled legacy. They insulted him for being poor. They had no idea who he really was. They had no idea the storm he was gathering, not merely for himself, but for the ghost of his grandfather's vision and the 100-year-old farm that was his birthright. The morning sun, still a pale, hesitant disk above the distant eastern fields, cast long, distorted shadows across the Reed Agri-Corp parking lot. Luxury sedans, their chrome gleaming like freshly polished silver, glided in with quiet authority, their occupants, executives with sharp suits and even sharper expressions, emerging with an air of practiced importance. They carried expensive leather briefcases and designer coffee cups, their hurried footsteps clicking a rhythm of power on the asphalt. Their conversations were clipped, precise, filled with acronyms and figures that spoke of vast operations and distant markets, of profits tallied and human cost discounted. One by one, they disappeared into the towering glass facade of the administrative building, their presence announcing the start of another high-stakes day at the agricultural giant, a day where the bottom line was sovereign, and empathy a forgotten language. Lucas, however, arrived differently. He walked, his worn, patched backpack, faded from countless dawns and dusks on his family's struggling farmland, swung gently against his back. It was a familiar weight, a constant reminder of the debt that gnawed at the edges of their ancestral home, the encroaching financial chains that had become the true architects of his current masquerade. The scuffed leather of his boots, though impeccably clean, bore the marks of honest labor, the deep creases telling tales of fields traversed, broken machines coaxed back to life, and the silent, grinding struggle to keep a legacy alive. His clothes were simple, utilitarian, sturdy jeans, a plain, thick cotton work shirt, a faded denim jacket. He was a silhouette against the rising sun, an anonymous figure amidst the bustling symphony of corporate arrival, a ghost in his own future empire. Nobody noticed him. No heads turned, no conversations paused. He moved like a shadow, blending into the periphery, a part of the landscape rather than a dominant feature, a specter haunting the edges of a world that was technically his own, yet utterly alien in its present form. He walked past the gleaming SUVs and sedans, past the perfectly manicured hedges, toward the back entrance of the sprawling processing plant, where the trucks rumbled and the workers milled, their faces already etched with the morning's weariness. This was precisely how he had planned it. Every detail, from the slightly frayed collar of his shirt to the carefully cultivated air of quiet humility, was a calculated part of his deep immersion. He was an echo in the halls of his own empire, seeking truths that only revealed themselves when everything he knew fell apart, when the veneer of prosperity peeled back to expose the raw, corroding heart beneath. He wanted to see Reed Agri Corp through the eyes of those who truly built it, those whose names never graced an executive parking spot or a quarterly report, whose lives were mere footnotes in the ledger of corporate success. Only then, he knew, could he truly understand the rot that threatened to consume not just his grandfather's company, but also the very fabric of the agricultural community he was fighting to protect, a community that included his own embattled farm. The weight of generations, the 100-year legacy, pressed down on him, a silent vow to reclaim what was lost. The air inside the plant was thick with the scent of feed dust, diesel, and the faint, acrid tang of chemicals. It clung to Lucas's clothes, a new uniform of anonymity, a pungent reminder of the role he now played. Supervisors, their voices grating and impatient, barked orders through bullhorns or directly into the ears of startled workers. "Move it, Johnson. We're behind schedule. Holt wants those crates stacked higher, Peterson, you deaf. You trying to lose your paycheck?" The commands cut through the rhythmic clanking and whirring of machinery, creating a cacophony of stress and urgency that felt less like productivity and more like a slow, deliberate strangulation. Lucas found himself assigned to a team loading sacks onto pallets, a repetitive, back-breaking task. His hands, though accustomed to the finer mechanics of farm machinery, the delicate touch required to calibrate a thresher or repair a vital irrigation pump, adapted quickly to the rough texture of the burlap and the brute force demanded by the monotonous labor. The work was honest, straightforward, and physically demanding, a stark contrast to the intellectual battles he usually waged in financial reports and agricultural projections. Yet as he stacked sack after heavy sack, his mind was far from blank. Every strained muscle, every bead of sweat, was a testament to the visceral reality of these workers, a reality hidden from the executive suites. He absorbed the rhythm of the plant, the unspoken anxieties, the subtle shifts in body language that betrayed a deeper malaise. This was not just a job, it was an intelligence mission, and every detail, no matter how small, was a piece of the sprawling, conspiratorial puzzle. He felt the phantom weight of his grandfather's hand on his shoulder, a silent exhortation to understand, to witness, to remember. But it wasn't just the physical labor that wore him down. It was the atmosphere, the insidious drip of negativity that permeated every interaction, every shared glance, every hushed whisper. The air itself seemed to vibrate with a constant, low-grade fear, a visceral tremor that spoke of precarious livelihoods and easily shattered dreams. "Look at this one," a supervisor, a burly man named Frank with a perpetually scowling face and eyes that held a glint of genuine malice, sneered, gesturing vaguely toward Lucas with a stubby finger. "New guy already looks like he slept in the ditch. Guess we're really scraping the bottom of the barrel, huh? Hope you don't break anything important, hobo." A few scattered, nervous laughs rippled through a small group of nearby workers, but they were hollow, forced, edged with their own anxieties. No one met Lucas's eyes. He felt their quick, dismissive glances, the judgment in their darting looks, the way they subtly distanced themselves, a palpable fear of association with the marked man. He caught snippets of hushed conversations, snide comments about his worn boots, the way his backpack seemed too old, too simple for anyone working at Reed Agri Corp, even at the lowest rung. "Must be desperate," someone muttered, loud enough for him to hear, a cruel, almost delighted tone in their voice. Another chimed in, "Yeah, probably needed the cash for a new tent. Maybe he can harvest weeds for a living." Lucas kept his gaze fixed on the task, his movements steady, his breathing even, a perfectly crafted mask of indifference. He registered every word, every dismissive gesture, every silent judgment, each one a tiny barb designed to chip away at his dignity. The insults, though not directed at his name, felt like small, sharp pebbles hurled against his skin, each one intended to remind him of his perceived place, to grind him down into the dust of insignificance. He stayed silent, observing everything, cataloging the small cruelties, feeling the pervasive chill of disrespect that seemed to permeate the very foundations of the plant. This was the raw, unvarnished truth he had come to find, and it was colder, harsher, more systematic than he had imagined. It wasn't just individual cruelty, it was a culture, a carefully cultivated environment designed to keep the lowest rungs compliant and desperate, a stark mirror to the desperation gnawing at the edges of his own 100-year-old farm. The rot inside Reed AgriCorp was not a sudden decay, but a slow, festering wound that had seeped into every corner of the operation, contaminating the very soil from which it drew its wealth. Lucas witnessed it in the weary slump of a worker's shoulders after a supervisor's tirade, the unspoken resignation in their posture, the extinguished spark in their eyes. He saw it in the flash of fear in a young man's eyes when he accidentally dropped a crate, instantly bracing for the inevitable dressing down, the threat of a written warning, a docked pay, or worse, the sudden, inexplicable loss of his job. Workers were not just laborers. They were targets, expendable cogs in a machine designed for profit over people, their well-being a trivial footnote in the grand scheme of corporate metrics. He watched a seasoned team leader, Maria, a woman whose hands were calloused from years of dedicated service, meticulously prepare a report on improving efficiency in the packaging line. She had poured her experience, her intelligence, her very spirit into those innovative suggestions, sketching diagrams, running simulations in her head during her brief, unpaid breaks. Days later, Lucas saw Megan Holt present the exact same data, the exact same innovative suggestions, to a room full of executives, taking full credit, her voice smooth and self-assured, her smile radiating an undeserved triumph. Maria standing quietly in the back, her face devoid of expression, a ghost of her own achievement, simply nodded along, a profound silence speaking volumes about the systemic theft of labor and dignity. It was a brutal ballet of corporate piracy, and Lucas felt a visceral surge of outrage on Maria's behalf. The bullying wasn't always overt, wasn't always a shouted insult or a public shaming. Sometimes it was the sudden, unannounced shift change, leaving a worker scrambling for childcare, facing impossible choices between their livelihood and their family. Sometimes it was the deliberate withholding of critical information, setting someone up for failure, watching them flounder before swooping in to correct their incompetence. The fear was a living entity on the floor, palpable as the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light filtering through the high windows. It dictated every movement, every hushed conversation, every averted gaze. No one risked speaking out, no one dared challenge the established order, for the consequences were swift, merciless, and often ruinous. The air was thick with unspoken grievances, with swallowed indignities, a suffocating blanket of resentment. Lucas saw a system that rewarded ruthlessness and punished empathy, where compassion was seen as a weakness, a liability to be purged. The company, his grandfather's company, had become a machine that consumed its own people, grinding down their spirit for the sake of abstract metrics and bottom lines, for the insatiable maw of quarterly profits. This wasn't just about profit. It was about power, wielded without conscience, a weapon in the hands of those who had forgotten their humanity. He saw the way mistakes, small and often unavoidable, were blown out of proportion, used as leverage, as excuses to deny bonuses or extend shifts without compensation, to subtly erode the already meager benefits. He saw the exhaustion etched into the faces of men and women who worked 12-hour days, their bodies aching, their spirits dulled, their dreams slowly fading into the stark reality of survival. The vibrant energy that should have pulsed through the heart of an agricultural powerhouse was choked by a suffocating culture of intimidation, a chilling prophecy of decay. He watched, absorbed it all, his quiet demeanor a perfect shield, allowing him to witness the raw, unfiltered truth. Every interaction, every overheard whisper, every dismissive gesture was a piece of the sprawling puzzle, confirming his worst fears about the direction his legacy had taken. The anger simmered beneath his calm exterior, a slow burn that fueled his resolve, a silent promise to his lineage. His grandfather's ghost, he imagined, watched with him, equally appalled by the corruption of his vision. This was not just a company. It was a battleground for the soul of an industry, and Lucas found himself increasingly ready for war. Amidst the harsh realities of the plant floor, a small flicker of warmth persisted, a tiny ember in the pervasive chill. His name was Tom, an older worker whose face was a roadmap of sun-baked wrinkles and good-natured creases, a testament to a life lived beneath open skies, far from the fluorescent glare of corporate avarice. Tom moved with a practiced slowness, his movements economical, deliberate, the result of decades spent taming machinery and hauling sacks, each motion a whisper of hard-won wisdom. He was the kind of man who still offered a genuine smile, a rare commodity in this sterile, transactional environment, a smile that crinkled the corners of his kind eyes and reached deep into the weary soul. Lucas found himself paired with Tom on a particularly tedious stacking task, the endless repetition of lifting and placing, a mind-numbing dance of manual labor. As the lunch whistle finally shrieked, a piercing sound that momentarily broke the industrial din, Tom motioned for him to follow with a simple nod, an unspoken invitation. They sat on overturned buckets near the loading bay, away from the main crush of workers, a small oasis of quiet in the roaring desert of the plant. Tom unwrapped a sandwich from wax paper, its simple aroma of cured meat and fresh bread a stark contrast to the sterile air of the plant, a smell of home and sustenance. "Here," Tom said, his voice raspy but gentle, pushing half of his sandwich toward Lucas. "Always bring too much. Wife worries I'll waste away." Lucas, surprised by the unexpected kindness, hesitated for only a moment before accepting the offering. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of profound human connection, a silent act of defiance against the dehumanizing culture that sought to strip them bare. As they ate in comfortable silence, the distant clatter of machinery providing a muted backdrop, a symphony of industrial indifference, Tom cleared his throat, a prelude to deeper truths. "Don't take it personal, kid," he said, his eyes wise and weary meeting Lucas's. "This place, it forgot what respect is. Used to be different. Mr. Reed, the founder," Tom paused, a wistful smile playing on his lips. "He knew everyone by name, knew their kids too, knew their stories, their struggles. Said a company was only as strong as the hands that built it, the families it supported. He walked these floors, same as us, talked to everyone. Felt like a family, not just a business." Lucas listened, his eyes fixed on the older man, absorbing every word, every nuance of longing and loss. He felt a profound pang of recognition, a connection to the man Tom described, a man he had only known through faded photographs and family anecdotes, a man whose principles he now desperately sought to resurrect. "What happened?" Lucas asked, his voice low, carefully neutral, masking the intensity of his internal inquiry. Tom sighed, a sound heavy with resignation, a lament for a bygone era. "Times change, kid, or maybe people change. New blood came in. People started looking at spreadsheets more than faces. Started seeing units instead of folks. Efficiency reports over human dignity. Profit margins over loyal service. Megan Holt, she's the worst of them. Thinks a title means she's better than God himself. She's the face of the new Reed AgriCorp, a face devoid of conscience." He shook his head slowly, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. "Just keep your head down, do your work. Don't let them get to you. This place, it'll drain you dry if you let it." Tom's words, spoken with the weariness of experience, resonated deeply with Lucas, confirming his darkest suspicions, painting a clearer picture of the erosion of his grandfather's vision. Tom was an anchor, a living link to the company's forgotten soul, a painful reminder of the human element that was slowly being crushed under the weight of corporate indifference and insatiable greed. He was a symbol of what Reed AgriCorp once was, and what Lucas desperately hoped it could be again, a beacon of humanity in a landscape of desolation. The simple act of sharing a sandwich, of a kind word offered without expectation, felt like a small rebellion against the cold, transactional nature of the plant, a spark of hope in the encroaching darkness. It fueled Lucas's silent resolve, solidifying his purpose, deepening his commitment. He wasn't just gathering evidence. He was fighting for the Toms of the world, for the Marias, for the soul of an industry, and ultimately for the survival of his own ancestral farm, the very foundation of his identity, threatened by the same corporate rapacity he now witnessed firsthand. The weight of his family's century-old legacy, the looming deadlines of his own financial chains pressed on him, a constant, silent driver. The struggle, Lucas realized, was not just external. It burrowed deep, a gnawing worm of self-doubt that whispered in the quiet hours of his shift, when the machinery's hum became a monotonous drone and his mind drifted back to the rolling fields of his own ancestral farm. He saw the weathered farmhouse, sturdy against the prairie winds, the same fields his great-grandfather had first plowed, the land that had sustained generations of Reeds. The irony was a bitter taste. He, Lucas Reed, the rightful heir to this sprawling agro-giant, was now a pauper in his own kingdom, his hands calloused, his back aching, a ghost in the machine. He had inherited the farm, not the empire, a legacy of land but also of profound debt, a series of bad harvests, unforeseen market shifts, and a predatory bank loan from a larger financial institution, one implicitly linked to the aggressive expansion of companies like Reed Agri Corp, had brought his family's century-old operation to the brink. The deadline for the balloon payment loomed large, a dark cloud on his horizon. That crushing weight, the threat of losing everything his family had built, was the true catalyst for his radical decision. It wasn't just about curiosity or a vague sense of injustice. It was about survival. He needed to understand the mechanics of the behemoth, the strategies it used to devour smaller farms, the insidious ways it consolidated power, because his own farm, his own legacy, was next on the menu. Every slight, every condescending glance, every snide comment about his mud farm upbringing wasn't just an insult. It was a chilling glimpse into the fate that awaited him if he failed. He wore the worn clothes, the mask of anonymity, not just to observe, but to understand the enemy from within, to discover the weaknesses in its steel facade. He learned the rhythm of the plant's breathing, the subtle language of its conveyor belts, the groans of its overworked engines. He saw how maintenance was perpetually deferred, how cheap, untested chemicals replaced proven, safer alternatives to shave pennies off production costs, regardless of the long-term impact on the land or the people. He started noticing the discreet, almost imperceptible discrepancies in inventory, the mislabeled shipments, the subtle diversion of certain quality products for private clients while lesser grades went to market. A conspiracy, not just against the workers, but against the very integrity of the agricultural supply chain, began to unravel before his eyes. It was more than mismanagement. It was an active betrayal of the trust his family's name once represented. He felt a deep, ancestral duty to not only save his farm, but to reclaim the very soul of Reed Agri Corp, to purge the corruption that had taken root in his grandfather's fertile vision. This internal battle, the perpetual hook of his personal stakes interwoven with the corporate rot, fueled his every deliberate, quiet action. The clock was ticking, not just for the plant's workers, but for his own land, his own name. He was walking a tightrope, the abyss of financial ruin on one side, the precipice of corporate exposure on the other. He knew that the system he was fighting against was the same one that threatened to swallow his family's century-old farm whole, that Megan Holt was merely a symptom of a larger, more predatory disease. The public humiliation came swift and brutal, a sudden squall in the suffocating stillness of the plant. It was late afternoon, the air thick with the day's accumulated dust and exhaustion, a heavy cloak draped over every weary soul. Lucas was painstakingly trying to troubleshoot a malfunctioning conveyor belt, a task he was far more qualified for than his current role suggested, his hands itching to diagnose and fix with the precision of a seasoned engineer. Yet he approached it with the deliberate slowness of an inexperienced hand, his movements hesitant, almost clumsy, a calculated part of his unassuming facade. Megan Holt, a whirlwind of tailored severity and barely contained disdain, swept onto the floor, her expensive heels clicking a sharp, impatient rhythm on the concrete, each click a tiny hammer blow against the already frayed nerves of the workforce. She moved with an aura of absolute, unassailable authority, her eyes scanning, searching for any imperfection, any deviation from her rigid, unforgiving order. Her gaze, cold and predatory, landed on Luca's, and her lips, painted a stark crimson, tightened into a thin, merciless line. "What in God's name are you doing, you imbecile?" Her voice, usually sharp, now had an edge of pure venom, cutting through the din like a scalpel. Lucas straightened up, his tools clattering softly against the metal, his face a practiced mask of bewildered deference. "Trying to fix this, ma'am. It's jammed. Looks like a bearing seized." Megan stalked closer, her expensive suit a stark contrast to the grime and honest sweat of the plant floor, a symbol of the chasm between their worlds. She looked him up and down, a sneer twisting her features, her eyes raking over his worn clothes with undisguised contempt. "Trying? You look like you're trying to understand basic physics, you incompetent oaf. Do you even know how these machines work? Or did your little mud farm upbringing not include anything more complex than a rusty hoe and a broken-down tractor? Your kind is useless with anything beyond primitive tools." A gasp ripped through the small group of workers who had instinctively fallen silent, drawn by the escalating tension, their own humiliation a reflected pain. Tom, standing a few feet away, clenched his jaw, his eyes flashing with indignation, a silent, defiant spark. Megan's voice rose, cutting through the sudden quiet, echoing with chilling authority. "This is Reed AgriCorp, not some backwater hovel where you can fiddle with broken toys all day. You don't belong here, wasting our time and resources. People like you, with your grimy hands and empty heads, your primitive understanding of efficiency, should stay out in the fields, where your skills might actually be useful. You are a liability, a stain on this operation, a constant reminder of the dead weight we're forced to carry." Her words, delivered with chilling precision, struck Lucas with the force of a physical blow, each syllable a precisely aimed projectile. The poor farmer life comment, the mockery of his background, the public shaming, it all hung in the air, thick and suffocating, a palpable pressure on his chest. No one spoke. No one moved to defend him. Workers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Lucas and Megan, fear warring with sympathy, their own faces betraying a shared, unspoken history of similar humiliations. They had seen this before. They knew the cost of intervention. Lucas's face remained a mask, his eyes calm, betraying nothing of the inferno raging beneath his skin, the cold fury that now solidified his purpose. But a line had been crossed. The humiliation was a raw, searing wound, not just for him, but for every unspoken insult directed at every worker in that room, every struggling farmer who had ever been dismissed as primitive. Fate has a cruel way of giving us exactly what we need at the moment we least expect it. This public shaming, meant to break him, instead solidified his resolve into something harder than steel, something forged in the crucible of ancestral pride and the burning desire for justice. His family's legacy, the hundreds of years of sweat and toil on the land, demanded more than just survival. It demanded retribution, a complete cleansing of the rot. As the last of the day shift workers streamed out, their weary figures dissolving into the twilight, the plant descended into a quiet hum of cooling machinery, a mechanical sigh of relief. The air, though still heavy with the scent of dried grain and lingering diesel, felt different now, more expansive, less suffocating, as if the oppressive weight of the day had finally lifted. Lucas, however, was far from done. His work, his asterisk true work, was just beginning. He moved with a newfound purpose, shed of his day laborer's deliberate slowness, his movements fluid and precise, the efficiency of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and why. His worn backpack now contained not just a meager lunch, but a small, nondescript laptop, its memory encrypted and external drives ready, a secure tablet, and a series of encrypted access cards, keys to a digital kingdom. He bypassed the general office, heading for a tucked-away security room he knew from his grandfather's old blueprints, a hidden nerve center that had been modernized but still bore the undeniable fingerprints of the original architect. The system, though updated with layers of contemporary software, still held archaic backdoors and vulnerabilities, digital echoes of his grandfather's genius for redundancy and oversight. With a few practiced keystrokes, he gained access, the familiar architecture of the network revealing itself to his trained eyes. Screens flickered to life, displaying a labyrinthine network of cameras, digital reports stretching back years, and archival data. The silence of the night was punctuated only by the soft click of his keyboard, the faint whir of servers, and the occasional distant rumble of an interstate truck, a lonely sentinel in the vast darkness. He started systematically, a digital archaeologist sifting through the layers of corporate deception. First, the incident reports. He found dozens, neatly filed, always blaming the lowest-level workers for equipment failures or production delays, their names scrawled alongside accusations of negligence. Then he cross-referenced them with maintenance logs. The patterns emerged, stark and damning. Faulty machinery, long overdue for replacement or repair, frequently cited as the actual cause of slowdowns, yet the official reports always shifted blame to operator error or lack of diligence. He pulled up internal communications, filtering for keywords: efficiency, cost-cutting, performance review, synergy, streamline. He uncovered a hidden directive, buried deep within quarterly summaries and executive memos, pushing managers to identify underperformers for dismissal, often based on metrics that were deliberately skewed by the very equipment malfunctions they refused to address. This wasn't just incompetence, it was a deliberate strategy of attrition. Next, the camera footage. He meticulously reviewed the hours leading up to Maria's packaging innovation, watching as she worked late, sketching diagrams on scrap paper, testing new sequences with tireless dedication. Then he fast-forwarded to Megan Holt's presentation. The visual evidence was irrefutable. Maria's ideas, presented almost verbatim by Megan, her smooth delivery completely devoid of the struggle, the ingenuity, the sheer effort that had gone into their creation. Lucas felt a cold, righteous anger spread through him, a searing blaze. It wasn't just incompetence Megan had accused him of. It was a systemic rot, a deliberate erosion of integrity, a corporate cancer consuming the company from within. He spent hours, blurring into the dead of night, downloading, encrypting, and cataloging every shred of evidence onto secure, untraceable drives. Performance reviews doctored to justify low raises. Overtime hours denied despite documented need. Safety violations ignored to meet impossible deadlines, putting lives at risk for a marginal increase in profit. Every click of his keyboard was a hammer blow, driving home the nails of his case, building an unassailable fortress of truth. He saw how innocent workers were not just blamed, but actively undermined, their careers stalled, their spirits broken, their very humanity chipped away. He even found internal communications regarding aggressive acquisition strategies targeting struggling family farms in the region, including thinly veiled references to the Reed parcel, his own farm. The truth, quietly documented in the digital shadows, was far more devastating than he had initially imagined, a conspiracy of greed reaching into the very fields that fed the nation. No confrontation yet. That would come. But first, the unwavering, irrefutable proof, the irrefutable evidence that would unravel their carefully constructed web of lies. The weight of his family's legacy, once a distant concept, pressed down on him with crushing force, a tangible burden of duty. He understood now, with a gut-wrenching certainty, why he was here. He was not just saving a company. He was fighting for the very soul of his heritage, for the land, and for the people tethered to it. The dawn was a long way off, and Lucas was just beginning to unearth the deepest, darkest secrets hidden within the heart of Reed AgriCorp. The week that followed the public humiliation saw Megan Holt's arrogance swell to monumental proportions, an inflated ego threatening to burst. She strutted through the plant, her expensive shoes now seemingly hovering inches above the scuffed floor, her voice sharper, her demands more peremptory, her every interaction dripping with condescension. The incident with Lucas had seemingly emboldened her, cementing her belief in her own untouchable authority, a self-anointed queen in her industrial kingdom. She held court in the break room, a circle of nervous supervisors nodding in deferential agreement, their faces carefully neutral as she expounded on her ruthless philosophy. "People like that," she declared, waving a dismissive hand in the general direction of the loading docks where Lucas now worked, a gesture dripping with contempt, "are disposable. They serve a purpose, of course, but their ambition extends only to the next paycheck, to surviving another week. They lack the vision, the drive, the sheer intellect required to lead, to truly innovate." She preened, basking in the unspoken, terrified admiration of her subordinates, their silence misinterpreted as agreement. "This company doesn't need dead weight. It needs lean, efficient operations. And that means culling the herd occasionally, making the difficult choices for the greater good of the bottom line." She doubled down on her rhetoric, her words echoing through the plant like a chilling prophecy, a promise of further purges. The fear among the workers, already pervasive, now verged on terror, a palpable dread that permeated every corner of the vast facility. Lucas watched, his calm demeanor a carefully constructed facade, his internal fury a silent, roaring inferno. He heard the whispered anxieties, the worried glances exchanged, the desperate attempts to make themselves invisible to avoid Megan's piercing gaze. He witnessed the quiet desperation, the resignation in their eyes, mirroring the same desperation he felt for his own farm. Then came the blow that truly ignited the fuse of his resolve, transforming simmering anger into focused, incandescent purpose. Tom, the old man who had offered him a sandwich, who had shared stories of his grandfather's vision, a man who represented the last vestiges of humanity within the plant walls, was called into Megan's office. He emerged an hour later, his face pale and drawn, etched with a deep, weary pain that went beyond mere disappointment, carrying a small cardboard box of personal effects, a lifetime reduced to a handful of trinkets. "They let me go," Tom mumbled, his voice hoarse with unshed tears when Lucas approached him outside the plant away from prying eyes. "Said I was causing sympathy, undermining morale, said I was too old, too slow. A liability." His eyes, usually kind and twinkling, now held a deep, weary pain, a profound betrayal. "Said I wasn't a team player for sticking up for the new guys, for just being decent." Tom confessed to Lucas in a broken whisper that his small pension barely covered his wife's medical bills, and this dismissal meant certain financial ruin, the loss of his modest home. He mentioned predatory financial services that preyed on recently unemployed elderly workers, offering quick, high-interest loans, implicitly linking to the same financial entities that held Lucas's own farm in thrall. Lucas's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white, his entire body rigid with a contained fury that threatened to shatter his carefully maintained composure. The casual cruelty, the utter disregard for a lifetime of loyal service, the callous destruction of an old man's future was breathtaking, an atrocity. Tom's dismissal, a blatant act of intimidation and a cruel demonstration of unchecked power, was Megan's final, catastrophic mistake. It wasn't just about Lucas anymore. It was about every single worker whose dignity had been trampled, whose loyalty had been betrayed, whose future had been callously discarded for a quarterly metric. It was about the predatory systems that allowed such figures to thrive, to devour the vulnerable, to erode the very foundations of community. Lucas felt a surge of rage so potent, so absolute. It was like a molten river running through his veins. The mask slipped for a fleeting second, revealing the steel beneath, the unwavering resolve of a man pushed to his breaking point. He knew what he had to do. He would not just reveal the truth. He would dismantle the entire rotten system, piece by painstaking piece, from the executive suites to the deepest, darkest corners of the plant, ensuring that Tom and all like him would find justice, and that his own family's legacy would finally be safe from the encroaching shadows. The game was no longer just about survival. It was about outright war, and Lucas Reed had just declared it. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, a deceptive tranquility hanging over Reed AgriCorp, a stark contrast to the brewing storm within its glass walls. The usual morning rush in the executive parking lot felt different, charged with an almost palpable tension, a hum of unspoken dread. Black sedans, polished to a high sheen, pulled up with unusual frequency, not just the usual parade of corporate vehicles, but sleek, unmarked cars, their tinted windows hiding the faces within. Out of them emerged not just the regular cadre of executives, their faces already creased with a nervous energy, but a phalanx of somber-faced board members, their expressions grim and unreadable, their very presence a harbinger of extraordinary circumstances. They were followed by a small army of lawyers, their briefcases thick with documents, their whispers hushed and urgent, their eyes darting nervously. The air crackled with an unspoken gravity, a sense of impending consequence, of a curtain about to fall on an old act and rise on a new, unsettling drama. Inside the sprawling, glass-walled conference room on the top floor, a space usually reserved for triumphant pronouncements and congratulatory toasts, the executive team stood rigidly, an expectant, nervous energy thrumming through them. Megan Holt, impeccably dressed in a power suit that exuded false confidence, radiated an artificial calm, her smile a little too tight, her posture a fraction too stiff, betraying the tremor of apprehension beneath. She believed this was her moment, a promotion perhaps, a recognition of her ruthless efficiency, her uncompromising dedication to the bottom line, a reward for her difficult but necessary actions. The CEO, a portly man named Robert Davies, his jowls quivering slightly, stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, his face a mask of official seriousness, a veneer he struggled to maintain. He clutched a stack of reports, his knuckles white. The large double doors at the far end of the room swung open with a quiet, almost theatrical precision, a moment of profound silence preceding a seismic shift. All eyes, tense and expectant, snapped toward the entrance, every breath held. Lucas stepped into the room. He wasn't wearing the worn work clothes today. There was no grease smudge on his face, no dust clinging to his hair. He was clad in a dark, impeccably tailored suit, the fabric clinging to his broad shoulders with understated elegance, his white shirt crisp, his tie a deep, authoritative blue. His boots, no longer scuffed, gleamed with a quiet polish, reflecting the polished floor beneath him. His hair, usually slightly disheveled from a hard day's work, was neatly combed, framing a face that, while still calm, held a new, steely resolve. But it was his eyes that held the true power, the same calm, observant eyes that had witnessed every injustice on the plant floor, now devoid of any pretense of humility, radiating instead an unwavering authority, the quiet strength of a man who held all the cards. He moved with a quiet confidence that filled the expansive room, a presence that commanded attention, a gravitas that made Megan Holt's carefully constructed composure begin to crack, her confident smile faltering. The air shifted, heavy with his unspoken presence, an unacknowledged force. Robert Davies cleared his throat, a nervous, rasping sound, his voice unnaturally loud in the sudden, absolute silence that had fallen. He gestured toward Lucas, a tremor of apprehension in his hand, a hint of the seismic shift to come. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces, his voice thick with a mixture of fear and forced solemnity. "I'd like to introduce Mr. Lucas Reed." A beat of stunned, disbelieving silence stretched, taut and suffocating. Then Davies continued, his voice dropping slightly, barely a whisper, yet resonating with inescapable truth. "The owner of Reed Agri Corp." The words landed like a physical blow, a concussive shockwave that reverberated through the room. A collective gasp, sharp and sudden, then a dead quiet so profound you could hear the distant whir of the HVAC system, the frantic beat of their own hearts. Megan Holt's crimson lips parted, her jaw going slack, her eyes wide with a dawning, sickening comprehension. The carefully constructed mask of composure shattered, revealing a face contorted by a cocktail of disbelief, dawning horror, and profound, gut-wrenching fear. Her eyes, wide and unfocused, darted to Lucas, then back to Davies, then wildly around the room, as if seeking a retraction, a denial, any escape from the impossible truth that had just crashed down upon her meticulously ordered world. Other executives, their faces drained of color, swayed slightly on their feet, some gripping the table for support. Some stared at Lucas with utter bewilderment, as if a ghost had materialized, others with immediate, sickening comprehension, the realization dawning cold and hard. The man they had dismissed, ridiculed, and humiliated, the poor farmer they had scorned, the liability they had mocked, was the very bedrock of their corporate world, the architect of their destiny. Their faces collapsed, masks of arrogance crumbling into expressions of pure, unadulterated shock. Their carefully constructed hierarchy turned irrevocably upside down. The world they knew, the system they enforced, had just been judged and found wanting by its rightful master. Lucas allowed the silence to hang heavy in the room, letting the shock ripple through every executive, every board member, every lawyer present. Their stunned faces, frozen in disbelief and horror, were a testament to the magnitude of his reveal, the crushing weight of their own blind arrogance. He walked to the head of the table, not taking Davies' seat, but standing beside it, radiating an unspoken authority that made Davies shrink slightly, his shoulders hunching in submission. His gaze swept over the room, pausing briefly on Megan Holt, whose face was now a sickly shade of white, her eyes wide and pleading, mirroring the desperate fear of a cornered animal. He felt no triumph in her fear, only a profound sense of grim satisfaction that justice, long overdue, was finally at hand, a cleansing fire about to consume the accumulated rot. "Good morning," Lucas began, his voice calm, clear, and resonating with an undeniable power that had been carefully hidden for weeks, a voice now stripped of its humble pretense. He held up a sleek, encrypted tablet, its screen glowing faintly, a silent testament to the meticulously gathered evidence. "For the past month, I have been working on the plant floor, experiencing Reed Agri Corp as it truly is, not as it appears on quarterly reports or corporate presentations. I have eaten the same meals, endured the same conditions, and witnessed the same injustices as the thousands of dedicated people who make this company run." His eyes, steady and unwavering, met theirs, piercing through their carefully constructed defenses. "I wanted to see how my company treats people when no one is watching, how it treats the very hands that build its empire." He paused, letting the implication sink in, letting the weight of his words settle upon them. The silence was absolute, broken only by the frantic beat of their own hearts, a symphony of guilt and fear. "What I found," he continued, his voice hardening slightly, each word a hammer blow, "was a culture of fear, intimidation, and profound disrespect. I witnessed hardworking individuals being bullied, their contributions stolen by managers desperate to climb the corporate ladder, their very dignity systematically stripped away. I saw loyalty punished, innovation stifled, and basic human decency discarded for marginal profit gains." He looked directly at Megan Holt, his gaze unyielding. "I witnessed the deliberate fabrication of performance reviews to justify unfair dismissals. I witnessed good people, loyal people, being treated as disposable. I witnessed systemic safety violations ignored, jeopardizing lives for the sake of speed. And I uncovered predatory strategies aimed at acquiring struggling family farms, including thinly veiled attempts to target my own ancestral land. Megan took an involuntary step back, her hands trembling uncontrollably, her face a mask of dawning terror. Her carefully built world was imploding around her. "Let me be clear," Lucas stated, his voice ringing with absolute finality, leaving no room for doubt or defiance. "This is not the company my grandfather built. This is not the legacy I intend to uphold. This rot ends today." He gestured to one of the lawyers, a formidable woman with an equally formidable stack of meticulously organized binders, who immediately pushed them forward, their presence a silent, irrefutable accusation. "Effective immediately," Lucas announced, his voice like cold steel. "Miss Megan Holt's employment with Reed AgriCorp is terminated." Her actions, meticulously documented over the past month, represent a fundamental betrayal of our company's values, a blatant disregard for human decency, and a clear breach of trust with its most vital asset, our people. Furthermore, the evidence gathered will be turned over to the authorities for a full investigation into corporate misconduct, including potential fraud and endangerment. Megan gasped, a choked, desperate sound, her face draining of all color. You can't. I've dedicated my life to this company. I built this division. I brought in the profits." Her voice was a fractured shriek, a desperate plea to an indifferent judge. Lucas's gaze was unyielding, devoid of mercy. "You dedicated your life to your own advancement, Miss Holt, at the expense of others. Your recent decision to fire Mr. Tom Jenkins, a loyal employee of 30 years, for causing sympathy and for speaking out against injustice, was the final straw. It was an act of pure, unconscionable cruelty, and it will not be tolerated." He turned to Robert Davies, the CEO, whose face was now a pale, sweating mask of resignation. "Mr. Davies, as CEO, you oversaw this culture. Your negligence, if not complicity, in allowing such practices to fester and thrive is unacceptable. You have a choice. Resign, effective immediately, or face immediate dismissal and a full investigation into your executive oversight, your financial dealings, and your responsibility for the systemic abuse that has corroded this company." Davies, pale and sweating, swallowed hard, his jowls trembling. I resign," he choked out, his voice barely a whisper, his corporate kingdom crumbling around him. Lucas nodded, a concise, decisive gesture, his eyes sweeping over the remaining board members, a silent promise of swift, merciless change. "As for the rest of you, a new era begins today. New leadership will be appointed, guided by integrity and respect. Policies will be fundamentally changed, rooting out every vestige of this toxic culture. We will implement a zero-tolerance policy for bullying, a transparent system for credit and promotions, and a robust support system for our employees, ensuring their well-being is paramount." He looked at the lawyer again, his voice softening slightly, a rare hint of the compassion that still resided within him. "Mr. Jenkins is to be immediately reinstated, his full back pay delivered, and he is to be offered the position of plant operations supervisor, with a substantial promotion and benefits package. His experience and loyalty are invaluable." A wave of murmurs, this time of surprise and awe, swept through the room, a mix of fear and dawning hope. The scale of the upheaval was staggering. Lucas's gaze softened further as he imagined Tom's reaction, the relief that would wash over the old man's weary face. This company was built on the sweat and dedication of its workers, on the fertile ground of innovation and trust. It will now be rebuilt on respect, integrity, and genuine leadership, restoring the vision my grandfather instilled. He then looked around the room, his eyes holding a final, powerful message, a warning that would echo in their minds long after he left. Never insult someone for being poor. Never dismiss anyone based on their appearance or perceived status. Tomorrow, they might own everything. Tomorrow, they might be the ones holding you accountable. The conference room emptied slowly, leaving Lucas alone with a small contingent of new, hand-picked executives, and the legal team he had secretly assembled, a new order rising from the ashes of the old. The air, though still charged with the residue of confrontation, now hummed with a different kind of energy, purpose, intent, the quiet hum of profound, irreversible change. The immediate aftermath had been swift, brutal, and necessary. Megan Holt, her face a mask of furious, mortified disbelief, her composure utterly shattered, had been escorted out of the building by security, her protests dying in her throat as she caught the gazes of the very workers she had belittled, their silent stares heavy with the weight of justice. Her personal effects, packed into a single small box, had been placed unceremoniously into the trunk of a waiting taxi, a stark and chilling parallel to Tom's dismissal. The poetic justice, sharp and absolute, was not lost on Lucas. He spent the rest of the day in a flurry of meetings, reviewing financials, restructuring departments, and outlining a new corporate ethos, a blueprint for a future built on respect and integrity. His personal legal team, working in parallel, was already initiating proceedings to stabilize his family farm's debt, leveraging his newfound corporate power to secure fair terms and safeguard his ancestral lands. By late afternoon, the phone calls had gone out. Tom Jenkins, at first bewildered, then cautiously hopeful, finally broke down in tears of relief and profound gratitude when Lucas himself personally delivered the news of his reinstatement and promotion, offering a handshake that sealed a new, hopeful bond. Lucas heard the tremor in the old man's voice, the genuine, heartfelt gratitude, and knew with absolute certainty that every insult, every moment of humiliation, every aching muscle on the plant floor had been worth it. The true Reed AgriCorp, his grandfather's vision, the spirit of a company that valued its people and its land, was slowly being resurrected, limb by painstaking limb. The following morning, Lucas stood at the expansive glass window of what was now definitively his asterisk office, the CEO's office. The sun rose, painting the horizon in hues of orange and gold, a fresh start, a canvas for a brighter future. He watched the first shift workers arrive, no longer looking for their fear but for a glimmer of hope, a subtle shift in their weary shoulders, a tentative smile. He knew it would take time to heal the wounds, to rebuild the trust that had been systematically eroded, but the first decisive steps had been taken, the first seeds of genuine change sown. The threat to his own 100-year-old farm, once a crushing weight, had receded, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. A soft, almost hesitant knock came at his door, pulling him from his contemplative vigil. "Come in," Lucas said, turning, his gaze calm and steady. It was Megan Holt. She stood there, not in her tailored suits that had once projected an aura of invincible power, but in plain, nondescript clothes, her hair disheveled, her face drawn and hollow, stripped bare of all pretense. Her eyes, once sharp, dismissive, and filled with a cold, calculated ambition, were now utterly defeated, rimmed with dark circles, reflecting the sleepless nights of regret and dawning understanding. A security guard stood respectfully behind her, a silent, watchful presence. She had requested a moment, a final word, a desperate plea for understanding. Lucas, despite everything, had granted it. "Mr. Reed," she began, her voice a fragile whisper, thin and reedy, a stark contrast to the booming confidence he remembered, to the cruel authority that had once dominated the plant floor. I don't understand. How could you? How could you let me treat you like that? How could you endure it?" Her gaze, filled with a desperate blend of confusion, raw pain, and a terrifying self-awareness, pleaded for an answer, for a reason to make sense of her own profound fall. Lucas walked slowly toward her, his posture straight, his eyes holding a quiet intensity that was both compassionate and unyielding. He stopped a few feet away, close enough for her to feel the tangible weight of his presence, the quiet, unshakable authority that now emanated from him like a palpable force. The scent of stale desperation, of shattered ambition and profound loss, clung to her, a stark contrast to the fresh, clean aroma of the new day, the invigorating promise of a rectified dawn. "Megan," Lucas said, his voice measured, devoid of malice, yet firm and resonant with an unwavering truth. "I needed to see the truth, not just what was happening on paper, in sanitized reports and fabricated spreadsheets, but what was happening to the people. I needed to witness the human cost of the policies you implemented, the culture you fostered. And you, in your relentless arrogance, in your unwavering conviction of your own superiority, showed me everything I needed to know, everything I needed to prove." She flinched as if struck, a visible tremor passing through her. "But the insults, the way I spoke to you, to a pauper, to someone beneath me." Her voice cracked on the last words, the irony of them crushing her, the bitter taste of her own words echoing in the silence. Her eyes pleaded for an absolution he could not give. Lucas nodded slowly, a somber acknowledgement. "Those insults, Megan, were precisely the point. They revealed the depth of the rot, the insidious corruption that had taken root in this company's heart. They showed me how easily power corrupts, how quickly empathy can be forgotten when status becomes the only currency, when human beings are reduced to mere units of production." He paused, letting his gaze pierce through her remaining defenses, stripping away the last vestiges of her self-deception. "You saw a poor farmer, Megan. You saw an opportunity to demonstrate your own perceived superiority, to reinforce your own flawed ideology that respect is earned through a title, through wealth, through ruthlessness, not through character or hard work or inherent dignity. You saw a weakness to exploit, a target for your disdain." Tears welled in her eyes, finally spilling over, tracing paths through the grime of her despair, a visible manifestation of her broken pride. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I truly didn't know who you were." "No," Lucas interrupted, his voice cutting through her weak apology, clear and unwavering. "You didn't know. And that, Megan, was your greatest failing. You chose not to see the humanity in the people around you, in the faces of those who built this company with their sweat and their loyalty. You chose to categorize, to dismiss, to dehumanize, to turn a blind eye to the suffering beneath your polished shoes." He looked at her, not with anger, for the anger had long since transformed into a cold, strategic resolve, but with a profound sadness for what she had become, for what the company had become. "The company my grandfather built was founded on the principle that every hand, every person from the fields to the executive suite was vital. You forgot that. You actively worked against it, systematically dismantling the very soul of this legacy." She lowered her head, the last vestiges of her pride crumbling, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "What will happen to me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, a pitiful plea for a future she no longer controlled. Lucas sighed, a sound of weariness rather than triumph, of a heavy burden finally lifted. "You will have to rebuild your life, Megan. Without the power, without the title, without the prestige you clung to so desperately. You will have to face the consequences of your choices, unshielded by the corporate ladder you so eagerly climbed." He paused, then added, his voice softened slightly, a hint of his inherent decency breaking through the stern facade of justice. "Perhaps, without the distractions of corporate ladder climbing, without the corrupting influence of unchecked power, you might finally learn the true value of simple human dignity, of empathy, of respect for every individual. It's a lesson you desperately need, one that might ultimately lead you to something more profound than any executive title." He turned, walking back to the expansive window, gazing out at the vast expanse of Reed AgriCorp, now bathed in the promising glow of the morning sun. The field stretched toward the horizon, fertile and full of promise, a new legacy unfolding before it, forged in the crucible of truth. "The choices you made were yours, Megan, and the consequences are yours to bear. My concern is now for the thousands of people who work here, who deserve a company that sees them, respects them, and values them. My concern is for the integrity of the land, for the future of the food we provide, and for the restoration of a legacy that was nearly lost." He did not look back as the security guard gently ushered her out, a silent, dignified exit. The quiet click of the door closing behind her marked not an end, but a beginning. A beginning forged in the crucible of public humiliation, born from the strength of quiet observation, driven by the weight of a 100-year-old family legacy and the crushing burden of debt, and destined to rewrite the future of an entire industry. The storm had passed, leaving behind a cleared sky, and the promise of a harvest cultivated with integrity, respect, and a profound understanding of the human cost. And so, their destiny was forged, a new legacy built from the ashes of the old. Their story now belongs to time, but its power only grows if shared. True leadership isn't measured by the height of one's office, but by the depth of one's respect for every individual, regardless of their station. But as one man breaks the system, another is trapped by it, their fate still hanging in the balance, a reminder that the fight for justice is never truly over. In a world obsessed with appearances, how often do we truly see the quiet power hidden beneath the surface, the unassuming hands that hold the reins of destiny? If this journey marked your soul, leave a like and subscribe. For the best stories are those that refuse to die in silence, their whispers echoing through the vast fields of time.